Hello and welcome to Susan Stanley Stitch in Time. I'm Susan, and on this channel we explore cross stitch, quilts, textiles, and other interesting notions from the 1800s, anything that relates to the stitching world. So welcome. If you haven't been here before, I especially welcome you, and I hope you'll stick around, and I hope you'll enjoy what you see. And if you're coming back, thank you, because I've enjoyed every minute of interacting with each and every one of you who reaches out and leaves a comment. So keep it up. It's wonderful. I have a few things to share with you today, and before I start, I want to thank you all so much, whether you purchased a Lou & Sue bag or folio or not, for your immense support. We are super thrilled. We have another collection coming out next week, and I'll save that for the video where we introduce it to you. But thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Today we're going to answer some questions. We're going to peek at what I've been doing. We'll look at some things that I've acquired. I'd want to talk to you a little bit about Black Sampler November and the power of the color black. And let's get started. So one of the questions I had last video, I talked about houses in samplers and in quilts and actually in artwork in general and the significance of that. And since then I've acquired this book. It was written by Marsha van Valin, who is the owner of the Scarlet Letter. She reproduces charts. This book is amazing. This book contains houses from England, Scotland, America, and other odds and ends, she calls them. And she talks about the architecture. She talks about the style. I mean, she's done a deep dive into historical architecture. I just wished I'd had this last time, but excellent book. I found this on Thrift Books. I don't know if it's out of print or not. I believe it probably is. But it has the house and the chart for the house, and sometimes a reference to the sampler where this chart can be found. If you just want a good read or just are fascinated with architecture and houses, I definitely encourage you to pick one up. I'll link the information below. As I was reading through it, I was envisioning a large sampler that was kind of a whole cloth of houses through time. And of course, I probably won't stitch that in my life, but I can dream about it. I was really excited to find an answer to the second question that was asked last time, and that was, what is a salt box and why are they called a salt box? Because Carol Saltbox probably knows, and she would probably tell me if I asked her, but I did a little bit of a dive into some early architecture, and saltbox houses were first seen in the 1600s in England and Europe, and around the end of that time period, that century, as people migrated to the New World, or to what became America, they began building salt boxes. Now, as you can see from the picture, they have a sharp angle in the front. There are actually 2-story houses in the front and 1-story in the back, and that was to accommodate for snow. They had windows facing the sun, the morning sun, and they're kind of iconic early American architecture, and I had no idea. But they are called salt boxes because they look like and were kind of modeled after the early salt boxes that colonial folks kept in their homes to store their salt, because salt was a precious commodity. It was not easily available. It was valuable. So there were these salt boxes that you've probably seen, and maybe you know a lot more than me about them, or maybe you're just learning this for the first time. But they have an angled lid, and so the angle of the roof of the salt box home also mirrored the angle of the salt box container where salt was stored, and so that's how they got their name. They're sprinkled across the East Coast, the early ones in the United States, and when I lived in Texas, there was a woman who was very much into the same things that I love, and she and her husband built an authentic salt box, and it was just fabulous to go in. My husband's cousin lives in Massachusetts, and they have an authentic reproduced salt box home that they live in. So just fun fact, and there actually is in this book a chart for a salt box. So if that's something that you don't have a chart that contains that, you might want to get the book. Now I'm going to show you something later on that has a salt box, and you may have that chart already. So I hope that answered that question, and I thought that was fun. It actually, reading that book encouraged me to do a little bit of a deep dive into architecture, because there are so many styles that I had no idea. I understand Tudor and Georgian, but boy oh boy, there's a lot more. So if you like to explore other things, and maybe, who knows, maybe you want to find out a little bit more about the sampler or the house that you're stitching. The second question had to do with something that hangs behind me normally during my episodes, and I took it down. They said, "What is that behind you? Is that a cross stitch piece or a needlepoint piece?" Actually, this piece is a piece of a coverlet. Now, coverlets were woven textiles from the early 1800s. I think they started in the 1700s. I haven't done a ton of research on them, just a bit of reading. They pop up in quilt books and in sampler books because they are so interrelated. And I think there are some charts where they've kind of imitated the look of a coverlet. I think Tanya, the Scarlet House, has some. So this, I don't cut up old textiles typically. I have a hard time doing that, but this was actually already cut up, and I found it and I said, that's just got to be rescued. It's too interesting. It's too amazing. So there we go. Don't have any idea who JHM Company is. Need to do some research into that. I definitely know a lot about 1840. Always learning, but it's beautiful. And when you see the patterns for these coverlets, which I have done a little bit of looking into, they look a lot like a cross-stitch chart, but they're actually woven. And I think maybe Christine Mountain Craft Studio does a bit of weaving. I don't know if she'd probably tell us a lot more. But so those answer your questions. What have I been stitching? Well, I kind of got away from applique and my Civil War bride for a bit, because this block was giving me fits. And if you haven't followed me and you don't know what I'm talking about, the Civil War bride is a quilt that I'm reproducing that is housed, that was made during the Civil War. And I talk a lot about it in earlier episodes. And I will, as I get closer to a finish, which is going to be some time, I'll talk a little bit more about it. But I believe it's housed in the Bennington Museum in New York, and I hope to get there someday and see it. No, actually, I think this one is at the Folk Art Museum. I'm wrong. It's at the Folk Art Museum. So this is the block I've been working on, and maybe at first glance it doesn't look too daunting, and really most of it wasn't. There were a lot of leaves and berries, but it's those strawberry caps that, oh my word. Now, I taught applique. I've taught quilting classes, and when I taught applique, I taught 12 different ways for people to explore, to get to know different techniques. One of my favorites is back basting or needle turn. These points are so sharp, and the fabric, some fabrics just don't retain their threads very well, and they're kind of loosely woven, so they were a bear. But they're done, and now I'm moving on to the next block, and I can't wait because I've got these massive borders to do as well. I had a lot of fun pulling reds from my collection and greens, and you might recognize the shade of green and some of these colors from some of the samplers that you stitch. Well, that's one of the things I've been working on. And I can't say that I'm sad that it's done. I'm very happy that it's done. The next chart that I really want to finish before Christmas is Mary Snow. Now, look at those little houses down there in the corner on Mary Snow. You can't always tell from the front view if it's a salt box because it's actually 2 stories in the front, and so you just think it's a 2-story home. I don't know. Does the back slant down and is it 1 story? And I don't know. Maybe it is. So this is what I have done so far. And like I said, I really want to finish this by Christmas. But I have been busy, as you know, sewing folios and doing other things. Well, there we go. I worked on the swan during the Queen's funeral. I think I'm going to hide ER the second somewhere in those bulrushes or somewhere in there. Not sure how yet, but that's my plan. The colors aren't great today. It's really cloudy. I'm working on getting better lighting for my filming. So thanks for bearing with me. I know I look washed out. I have on, anyway, we're doing the best we can, but I'm working on it. The next thing I started was my Simple Harmonies box. Now this is no joke, and I was afraid to death of it, but Katie has laid it out so beautifully with detailed pictures and detailed instructions, and she's available. It's kind of, she's like your, turkey hotline at Thanksgiving when your turkey's not cooking correctly. She's your Simple Harmonies box hotline. She's got her email and you can contact her with any questions. So I started stitching on this. This chart, by the way, would be awesome for Black Sampler November. And there is something very peaceful. This is, I believe this is an original by Jacob of Modern Folk Embroidery. There is something so peaceful and calming about stitching Quaker motifs. I kind of equate it to listening to Mozart. It's just, it makes sense. It's mathematically balanced somehow in my brain. I know there's a psychology to it. So I started this, and I'm using a blue. I'm using the Goblins and all the threads that of course that Katie recommended. I'm excited to try the metallics and the Swasserfine. It's an adventure. So I got that motif completed. I'm stitching it on Cloudburst is the name of the color. I just wanted something soft. I love red. Red's my favorite color. Why I picked this, I don't know. But I think this for me is going to be a family heirloom box, and probably everyone in my family except me, their favorite color is blue. So I guess I was influenced by that. And I don't mind stitching in blue, not one little bit. I love, and my experience with this Goblins thread has been so fascinating. I I can't tell you how wonderful it is to stitch with. It does not break down. It glides through this linen, this legacy linen, in such a beautiful way. I do find, though, at the end I have to give it a gentle tug, and I tend to be really heavy-handed when I stitch, so I'm being really careful. But just a gentle little pull to hold that cross in place. Now, I have been told that I need to use a hoop, so I'm gonna be a big girl stitcher, and I'm going to start using a hoop. And I think especially for this project, because it is so size sensitive, this piece that I'm stitching has to fit exactly on the top of the box. So that sloppy way that I've been attempting things, that's going out the door, and we're moving on to greener pastures. And although I love stitching in hand like crazy, I do not like the stab and poke method, but that's what I'm going to learn. I'm going to move on to that. What have I acquired lately? I have acquired a few things, so excuse my reach. There is somebody in the stitching world who is going to debut some linen, and I acquired a piece of it. I haven't stitched on it yet. It's a gorgeous color. Shows up a little bit better on the white. Absolutely gorgeous. The dyeing process that this person is using is really eco-friendly. When you get it, it has the most wonderful smell. So when I'm allowed to, I will give you more information. There is another option coming. Can you believe it? Are we so lucky? So much fabulousness. I'm also a part of the Country Sampler Schoolgirls Club, History Club, Threads of History Club. Doesn't that just sound, yeah, that's right up my alley. So this just came out from Needlework Press, and I gasped. This is so me, I can't tell you. I love this chart so much. I want to rip into it and start it. There's that house with the blue roof. What is it? Love it. Look at how they package it. There's that blue roof. There's that blue. We're going to talk about that blue. I know a lot about that color in fabrics. I'm just amazed by it. I love it. So exciting. I downloaded a few charts that have come up. I always love what Rebecca of Hedgerow Stitching has put out. This is a downloadable, just a sweet little sampler. Won't that be sweet for Christmas? Just lovely. So I've got to get Mary Snow finished so I can get going on this, because I think this would be a really nice calming stitch over the holidays when you've just had it and you want to get off your feet. Hedgerow Stitching. This is Charlotte. My glasses. Charlotte Whitehouse, 1826. And so that coverlet I showed you was 1840. This is 1854. I'm so curious about every 10 years, every few years, how styles changed, and across the world things change. And this is, to me, very interesting because of the animals being such a focal point. And this one's just so sweet. Love it. Hedgerow Stitching is available online as a download. And then, of course, Becca has reproduced a few antique samplers, and this one is her Elizabeth Horry. It's just delicate. It's just sweet. Becca is pretty new, was new at the time to linen stitching, and I was watching her stitching those letters over one. She was just going to town. She wasn't afraid of it one bit. So this is also a PDF download. The colors aren't showing up super well, but just lovely pinks and very sweet. You could easily replace that with a child's name and make it a sampler. for their bedroom to commemorate their birth or in a special event. And then this most amazing box arrived. I can't tell you, the packaging on this is just unbelievable. So I filled down the Theodora hole. The box alone, look at this. Now later on, next month, I will show you an ornament, and the reason I was drawn to this is I will show you this ornament that my grandmother made, probably in the 50s, 1950s. And it's this Theodora is very reminiscent of this ornament with the sequins and all the beads. Look at the way it's packaged. I mean, it's just so fun. I don't know what little elves helped Katie package these, but I have a feeling she did it all by herself. Here's all the little sequins and beads. Definitely going to be a lot of fun, and I think this is also a really nice thing to work on when things quiet down or right before the holidays. Apparently it's quick. Now, nothing in my world is fast. I'm not a fast stitcher, not at all. But maybe I can get this done a little faster than other things in my life. Let's see. All right. I want to talk to you about the color black, because this is Black Sampler November, and I've had a lot of questions as I've mentioned dyes and different fibers and different techniques. I've had a lot of people ask me, why are those early samplers, why do some of them have all this, it's actually called rendering or migrating, but why is the black just blopping all over? It almost looks like somebody spilled some ink on it. What's going on? So black is, black, if you've stitched with black, you know that sometimes the fibers feel different. They just feel like stressed. They've been run through the mill. Well, they have. And early fibers that were dyed with black had really been run through the mill. To get that inky black that's stuck, and before synthetic dyes, that was almost impossible to do. And that's why you see this rendering going on, why you see the color migrating out of the threads into the linen and around, because the fiber was, the dye was not set. There were no synthetic mordants. There was no mordants that was effective for that yet. So people were trying everything under the sun to make this color stick, because as I'm going to tell you in a minute, it was a highly, highly sought after color. Some of the early dyes contained iron. They were made with sumac. They were made with coal and ashes from the hearth. They used birch and oak. I'm looking over here at my notes. They used arsenic. So not only were they difficult to stick to the natural fibers, they also were very toxic. Some people argue that black is not really a color, but for the purposes of this talk today, we're going to refer to it as a color. It has symbolized luxury and poverty. It has symbolized evil. It has symbolized piety. It has symbolized power and humility. And as far as power goes, don't we even see that now? We see judges' robes are black. We see power suits are black. We see a tuxedo, which is usually worn for a very formal event, typically black. So we pick up messages from colors, and black is a really interesting color because there are so many mixed messages. It can trigger a different emotion or feeling depending on your background and where you live and where you're from and what you've been taught or what you've picked up in your culture about the color black. We know, because we just came out of Halloween, that black cats and black ravens kind of symbolize daunting evil or foreboding that something's going to happen. So we already know just intrinsically what our culture, if you're an American, kind of spreads about the color black. So the real focus on black started in the Western European world around the time that Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon. And so there's a couple of theories as to how the Spanish blackwork came to England, but one of them is that it came through Catherine from Spain. And I'm going to show you some pictures here of close-ups of paintings of this most exquisite embroidery. And stitchery. And I'll tell you what, after doing a little look into this, I wanted to do some black work, and I wanted to do it like that day. It is so delicate and beautiful and lace-like. I can see why it was so highly sought after and respected and coveted. So probably Catherine of Aragon it didn't start in Spain, may or may not have. It's more likely from other things that I read that it started in Morocco, but it was similar geometric shapes and motifs, but just not done in black, so colors. So we're not really sure, but as people moved and migrated and trade was going on, these ideas and these techniques were shared. So Catherine of Aragon married Henry VIII, and then this Spanish blackwork was all that everybody wanted. Well, then when they were divorced, it became called blackwork, and it was still highly sought after and highly coveted. It was typically stitched on the collars and the hems and the cuffs. And the idea was that it was a way of hiding dirt and, of course, embellishing clothing in such a gorgeous way. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. So, yes, do I want to start some black work for Black Sampler November? Yeah, I do, but I'm not going to. Because of the dye and the lack of really effective mordant, natural mordant, before synthetic dye was discovered, a lot of this hasn't survived. In the 1700s, black was worn a lot, and it was worn only by the elite. In fact, because of sumptuary laws, it was outlawed for anyone else to wear it, which is hysterical in our time. And then by the 1800s, black became the color of mourning. And during that time, it was expected that when you were in mourning that you wear black for at least 2.5 years. I'm going to show you some mourning prints that I've collected in fabric. By the end of the mourning period, when the 2.5 years were close to being completed, women were allowed to wear, or if they were following the customs of mourning, they were allowed to wear these cotton prints. And they've been some of my favorite prints in stitching for years. They just remind me of lace. So this one was obviously transitioning out of the solid black. It's got a lot of heavy black dye in it. It was printed on cotton, and now we're getting into a little bit less black dye as we transition toward colors that are almost a dusty gray. And these would transition then into some purples, but we'll talk about that at a future time. So you can see the array of options. And there is a quilt that I made because I have just loved these fibers for so long, these fabrics. They, like I said, they remind me of lace. So I made this doll quilt using as many of the morning prints as I had in my collection. I actually had a friend share some of hers with me, but aren't they just gorgeous? And so can't you see these gorgeous gowns out of some of these very intricate, beautiful, beautiful designs. I think one of my favorite aspects is this dusty picotage in the background where it's just an array of little dots. And of course I love the strong black. I don't know if I had lived back then if I would want to wear these or not. I think I probably would have been drawn to them, even though, you know, there were connotations. Now this one is definitely not a morning print. I don't know if you can recognize that. That is actually a William Morris, but I had to throw it in as well. It's the rabbits. And of course we see morning samplers as well, and a lot of them use black, but mostly it's a motif of someone at a graveside mourning and remembering the person that was lost, a grieving widow. But what started happening as these widows were expected in proper society to wear black for 2.5 years, well, they started being poisoned, but nobody really knew that what was happening. They just thought they were becoming hysterical. They would break out in welts, they would have, you know, fits and fevers and all kinds of health issues until finally it was uncovered that it was the dye that was poisoning them. In cotton, and that was mostly with silks, and then cotton fabric became more prevalent, and the dyes, the black dyes, before they became stable, rotted. So you can find some old examples of fabric pieces where maybe the center of a flower was black. It's just like somebody burnt a hole in that center. It's gone. So in 1890, synthetic dye developed, and that's what we live with today. We live with synthetic dyes that are much more stable and don't bleed, but you do have to sometimes you have to set a pair of black jeans, or, now I don't know about threads. I would be really careful with black threads, getting them wet. But I hope that answers your question and probably gives you more information than you expected, but I hope that makes you a little bit interested in, you know, just the background of black and how much work it took to create these threads and these textiles. We could just go to our local needlework store and buy them, and they're readily available. For the most part, it was a different time, different world. I want to show you what I'm working on for Black Sampler November. Of course, you might already know, or guess, or remember. I do want to mention that if you want to go down this black embroidery rabbit hole, like I have, there is a website, and I'm going to link it below. Kim Brody Salazar, stringornothing.com. I will link it below, and she has several free charts that you can download if you want to take a try and just look at it. I hope those pictures were inspiring. They certainly are to me. So for Black Sampler November, I'm going to devote some time to my Anne Grimshaw. This is a chart. Sorry, it's glary. It's a photo. Chart by the Scarlet Letter. So many people are working on it, and so many people have finished it. So I'm very motivated. 1818, Ackworth Quaker. I'm stitching this on Russian tea cake. I got this at the attic last year and started it and put it away and haven't touched it since. So I'm really looking forward to, I just have this little bite of a start. This lighter background really makes the black pop. So I think I'm going to keep it that way and keep going. So that's what I'm hoping to touch base on. I've been, like, as you know, sewing on my sewing machine a ton and busy in that department. But between the Simple Harmonies box and this, I have plenty of things to stitch. And hopefully after Thanksgiving, I can get into the Theodora and Mary Snow and get those done by the end of the year. I'm glad you could join me today. Thank you so much for popping in and letting me catch up with you and share with you a little bit about black, the color black and black fibers. There are some excellent books out there. If you'd like to do a little more reading, I'll put those in. Really, there's just a whole world when you start exploring this stuff. There's a whole world of research. You will never be bored. Next time I will share a sneak peek of some other things that I have planned and going on, some things that I've been trying to pull together. Excuse me. I'll share with you some of my future plans and projects. And until then, make time for stitching, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.